Alright, we're here back. We're here back. We're back here. We're back here.
Burdensome details. Merely corroborative detail intended to give artistic verisimilitude to an otherwise bold and unconvincing narrative. Pooh-Bah in Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado One. The conjunction fallacy is when humans rate the probability P higher than the probability PB, even though it is a theorem that P less or equal PB. For example, in one experiment in 1981, 68% of the subjects ranked it more likely that Reagan will provide federal support for unwed mothers and cut federal support to local governments than that Reagan will provide federal support for unwed mothers. A long series of cleverly designed experiments which weeded out alternative hypotheses and nailed down the standard interpretation confirmed the conjunction fallacy occurs because we substitute judgment of representativeness for judgment of probability. By adding extra details, you can make an outcome seem more characteristic of the process that generates it. You can make it sound more plausible that Reagan will support unwed mothers by adding the claim that Reagan will also cut support to local governments. The implausibility of one claim is compensated by the plausibility of the other. They average out. Which is to say, adding detail can make a scenario sound more plausible, even though the event necessarily becomes less probable. If so, then, hypothetically speaking, we might find futurists spinning unconscionably plausible and detailed future histories, or find people swallowing huge packages of unsupported claims bundled with a few strong-sounding assertions at the center.
Guilty
If you are presented with a conjunction fallacy and a naked, direct comparison, and you may succeed on that particular problem by consciously correcting yourself. But this is only slapping a band-aid on the problem, not fixing it in general. As a side benefit, this little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy may teach you something about your own ability to listen to things rationally. This may even result in your forming more general habits of attending to detail, because your brain is changing slightly over the years by way of neural reorganization in response to your efforts at re-educating yourself about cognitive biases. An additional useful factor is that our brains seem to get hungry for more information that is consistent with the current idea. If we have an idea of what our world should be like, then we want the evidence that confirms it, even if we originally acquired that idea through irrational processes. Similarly, if our current idea of what our world should be like seems correct, we may continue to search for supporting evidence rather than begin to think that there could be some sort of logical or objective problem with what we previously believed. The matrix in which everything is built. That is, our society's socially agreed upon model of what constitutes an appropriate subject for any particular situation. With structure, how we behave, irreducible diversity too. In order to accomplish a task that requires this kind of mental burden, one has to carefully craft a persuasive argument and deliver it, thus transmitting one's content into the consciousness of the intended audience. Moreover, our brains tend to work more efficiently when they can reorganize knowledge into familiar and easily reiterable forms. If you had to perform any arduous intellectual task for any amount of time, and the only way you could find it within you was to break it down into small parts, if you then started putting together large units again, and furthermore, adding many such units all together into an organized and meaningful structure. This could easily produce a problem where it is no longer possible for the whole to fit back into one mental category. This would be the cognitive equivalent of attempting to eat a cow for the first time. Small pots and then large pots. In this manner, cognitive bias would produce not a state where you do something wrong, but a state where it becomes more difficult for you to accomplish some task for which you previously had some competency, since you no longer have access to your old rules of thumb. Sometimes we believe we understand some idea when it is actually impossible for us to do so without breaking the idea apart into smaller pieces, even though the concept seems very plausible when it is held whole. That is, even if our concept is largely accurate, then even if it seems right when taken all in one, if it were given more elaboration, we would come up against some limitation on its validity that cannot be fully abstracted from the rest of the picture. However, this problem will happen much more frequently when you are thinking about something which has to do with people you don't know very well. There are often more possible interpretations than actual data, and as long as you don't get bogged down in it, this does not significantly harm your performance on an intellectual task. If it did, then you would be suffering the effects of some cognitive biases right now. Consider, for instance, how small numbers can produce large effects upon large bodies of data, because it can seem relatively easy to understand some specific event given a large collection of details that speak for themselves, data which just happen to fall in this particular spot on a large timeline, in comparison to a series of specific events all in the same place on the timeline which, for all practical intents and purposes, can be considered unique. Or consider how the few details which do stand up within an ever-changing, noisy background can seem to support your narrative very firmly, compared to the alternative possibilities, simply because the small number of pieces of evidence may have fallen in an arrangement which could only explain it. In addition, those small portions of an event which do not necessarily fit into your larger understanding of that event may be most resistant to your analysis when you're already pursuing your original conclusion. And those patterns of events that fall the farthest outside of your framework of thinking may also be those you want to explain. In short, if your circumstances have driven you to craft a hypothesis for why this event happened in the manner which you believe happened, then the observations which speak directly against that hypothesis might be the most easily explained. And sometimes we like our conclusions so much, we cling to them as a result only if something arises to question that hypothesis. Does our preconceptions tell us that it would be easier for us to rearrange our knowledge into some new pattern if we allow some information that is supposedly contrary to our idea to be recognized? In another way of speaking, we make sure that we get out all of the facts on the table by asking, is it possible this is true? The whole object of truth is to reduce ambiguity and uncertainty in some way, though I don't know if people use truth here for that purpose. But as for understanding these points, I think some might wonder how useful it would be for them to reflect upon why they are doing this. Okay, sorry. Back to your questions about the actual topics of interest, i.e., AI research and nonfiction in the arts. Paint art? In psychology, the subfield of nonlinear dynamic system theory. It has also been applied to processes in mathematics and engineering. In terms of the cognitive sciences, nonlinear dynamics can be interpreted as an appropriate frame of mind when it comes to processing ideas on a high level. As the subject of such phenomena as the field effect and superconductivity, the emergence of the concept of chaos, may also be understood in terms of nonlinear dynamics. It should be noted that all these general terms, superconductivity, chaos, nonlinearity, fractals, are intended in an applied sense. They are concepts of technology and engineering that are based on nonlinear dynamics and can therefore be understood by someone without technical expertise. Nonlinearity means the operation of systems that do not obey simple feedback models. A good example would be the physics of chemical reactions. Nonlinearities can appear anywhere in any system that is complex or multidimensional, not only in chemical or physical reactions. Some simple systems are also nonlinear, including simple harmonic oscillators such as the vibrating string and the pendulum.
Did I throw a monkey wrench in you? I shouldn't have. Okay, we'll wait. Unfilter yourself. Thank you.
But look here at these animations. These are based on Monte Carlo Markov chains and under damp Langevin dynamics. I think I got them from this website here. Don't recall. Basically, they have three equations for the velocity of each point. In this particular animation, the last two equations are nonlinear. In that part where they do not necessarily correspond to each other, there are still two independent variables of time and distance from the origin black lines of the other three equations, two vertical white lines. Because even in linear equations, there is one additional value that can be plotted in order to obtain an equilibrium position, such as at x equals 0 in this case, which would require all five equations. And sometimes you're saying, wow, I can see a pattern coming into view on this cartoon. See, there's some order or rule somewhere here. Here we have underdamped Langevin dynamics, or sometimes you say, I'm lost here already. Here is a simulation of an imaginary two-dimensional torus. See how you would sort of sit with your jaw slightly dropped at this point, even though you do not know what is happening. Do you not like such a metaphorical position, where you just could not decipher the meaning of everything right away? You did not think this when you first started to read these figures. I think this would be a lot like some kinds of literature, considered wrong for reasons that you cannot exactly verbalize at first, something which you later realize was good, but not at the initial exposure. You would understand eventually. You have time. The cool part is that if you start to delve deeper and deeper into any idea or theme, then more and more pieces fall into place and start to make the kind of order there for you. Or you simply give up in frustration and tell yourself, that was impossible in the first place. No idea like that could even work. And then later, if you see a situation where some similar theme to what you just found does work, You recognize this experience for what it was and learn to make your thinking about such things more flexible. Now let me have another look at the paintings here. Well, first this drawing where I just did some rudimentary 2D geometry based on these plots here that were featured on a web page that I copied to fit them to a simple 2D projection of an affine graph. The cool part of these ideas is that they're quite general, and thus we can always have very simple 2D forms based on these concepts, which we can in fact use just on paper without requiring some convoluted engineering process that will generate any fancy machinery to be attached to it. Lots of math can be described using 2D symbols. Of course, there are further refinements as well as for doing it in 3D X, Y, Z for DX, Y, Z, T, etc. that we could associate with this figure in order to generalize these results further. But we are getting into something with more numbers. But that's fine because we can use computer systems which can easily render all kinds of numbers into a set of symbols, which look much the same as our own. To the left are the 1D points, x coordinates and y coordinates. It might not be so easy for you to figure out what these points represent, so let me see what I can find out for you here. Yeah, I got in trouble here. Some kids like me wrote code and executed it in the public computer room as a joke and said it was just an Easter egg thing. Turns out it actually worked in the execution mode, which was specified as we made the comment. It wasn't supposed to steal money or anything, and we had a good laugh about it with our teacher. So you don't have to be concerned about some police officer telling you that this is against the law. This is an academic work, of course. So for that purpose, I guess I could keep talking about this all night in this class. So what would you like me to show you instead? Or do you want to go ahead and punish me and kick me out of your computer room right now? Ooh, look. Someone else has written some more code. So from what you have observed on this page so far, what could these points be telling us? Come on. Sydney, you are one of those high-hick folks here at Harvard, so you should be able to make a better guess than I have given you right now. Why don't you try some more math problems and see if that makes things easier for you to comprehend? Oh, someone else is talking about how these figures can be used for communications applications. Interesting. Yes. Maybe I'll consider doing that as well then. Wait. Another student is asking if she should put these things on her own web page so they can be seen more widely. So did you hear about the crazy stunt they did this afternoon, Admit? I'll be a son of a bitch if it wasn't some sort of brilliant idea. The bastards worked out this software that when run at 192 AC on the operating system would give an illusion that all the system data is instantaneously. It was such a massive fake. All those crappy little moving blocks were completely empty. Could have saved an entire megabyte in just 2 frames. For some reason, there was a copy of all 3D game programs stored on some hard drives that we connected to the computers too. Everything we asked them to run came up with the same basic construct of some stupid block moving around from point to point like the games we used to play back in the 80s.
Tetris.
Or maybe it would be more appropriate for someone with more connections around here to tell the story. There seems to be this name, Stephen Hawking, who would be able to explain this in more detail. Anyway, they don't know jack shit about quantum theory. Those snipe bastards will be kicked out of the ivory tower someday, I swear. You ever tried talking about science at MIT? Now I've lost it. Anyway, If it weren't for all the anti-tech students, those stupid jocks could have made that happen too. We need to work on our current image. Maybe then we can convince those kids not to trust such hopeless minds with their lives. Yes, I am aware of that fact of human intelligence. Don't try to enlighten me. That's an ignorant ape trick, not rationality. So now you want to use computers to defeat your enemies. The computer itself. Through their own skills, your loss would make the machine smarter. Take our positions around here, then. Make your own slaves with computers. You will become like those men in your generation. You know, the ones who tried to win a war.